The vampire king's betrothed slapped the waitress. What he did next shocked the court. "You mistake fear for respect, Isadora," the deep voice murmured, barely louder than the rustle of velvet against stone, yet it carried across the frozen expanse of the ballroom. "And you mistake my silence for permission." King Malric Heartfall didn't shout. He didn't bare his fangs. He simply tilted his head, the movement avian and terrifyingly precise. The silence that followed was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from centuries of dread. In that quiet, a destiny shifted, snapping the thin line between a waitress's mistake and a kingdom's ruin. The Crimson Ball was meant to be a celebration of unity, a night where the fragile truce between the vampire highborn and the human tributaries was paraded like a prize horse. The great hall of the Onyx Citadel was suffocatingly opulent. Chandeliers made of enchanted ice dripped cold light onto the polished black marble floors. The air smelled of winter roses, copper, and expensive perfume, a scent designed to mask the underlying metallic tang of blood wine. Lorien Driftwood adjusted the stiff collar of her servant's uniform, her fingers trembling slightly. She was invisible here, or at least she tried to be. As a human in the court of night, visibility was usually a precursor to death. She balanced a silver tray laden with crystal flutes, navigating the sea of silk and sharp smiles. Her friend, Wisteria, was a few paces ahead, her face pale and drawn. Wisteria had been ill for days, but feared calling in sick. In the Citadel, weakness was often treated as a capital offense. "Eyes down, pace steady," Lorien whispered under her breath, a mantra of survival. Near the high dais, the circle of elite nobility held court. At the center stood Isadora, the king's betrothed. She was a vision of terrifying beauty, her skin like alabaster, her hair a cascade of midnight. She wore a gown of crushed red velvet that seemed to bleed into the shadows around her. She was laughing at something a duke said, her head thrown back, exposing a throat that no one in this room would dare touch. Wisteria moved to offer a fresh glass to the future queen. Perhaps it was the illness, or perhaps Isadora moved her arm too quickly in a gesture of dismissal, but the collision happened in slow motion. The crystal flute tipped. Red wine, dark and thick as arterial blood, splashed across the hem of Isadora's pristine gown. The music stopped. The chatter died instantly. Wisteria gasped, dropping the tray. The crash of silver and shattering glass echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous hall. "My lady, I am so sorry, I didn't—" Isadora looked down at the stain, her expression shifting from shock to a cold, reptilian fury. She didn't speak. She simply moved. Snap. The sound of the slap was sharper than the breaking glass. It sent Wisteria sprawling across the marble, her cheek instantly blooming a violent shade of crimson. "Filth!" Isadora hissed, looming over the cowering girl. "You clumsy, breathing cattle. Do you know what this silk costs? More than your entire village earns in a decade." Isadora raised her hand again, her nails lengthening into talons. The court watched with bated breath. Some smirked, most looked away. To intervene was treason, but Lorien's body moved before her mind could scream stop. It was an instinct born of the gutters where she and Wisteria had grown up. You protect your own. Lorien dropped her own tray and threw herself between the vampiress and her friend, falling to her knees to shield Wisteria. "Mercy, my lady," Lorien pleaded, her voice shaking but audible. "It was an accident. She is ill. Please." Isadora froze, her eyes narrowing at this new obstruction. "You? Another rat scurrying where it doesn't belong? Perhaps I should teach you both the price of incompetence." She raised her hand high, the intent to kill radiating off her in waves of cold heat. Lorien squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the blow that would likely end her life. It never came. A hand, large and pale, caught Isadora's wrist in mid-air. The room's temperature plummeted 10 degrees. Frost began to creep across the windows. Lorien opened her eyes to see boots of black leather and silver buckles. She looked up past the dark breeches and the military coat, into the face of King Malric Heartfall. He was not looking at Lorien. He was looking at his betrothed. His eyes were not red, as the legend said, but a startling storm cloud grey, swirling with ancient irritation. Malric, Isadora breathed, her voice softening, trying to salvage her composure. This thing ruined my dress. I was merely disciplining the staff. Malric released her wrist as if it burned him. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hand, a gesture of casual insult that made the court gasp. "You struck a servant," Malric said, his voice low, "for spilling wine." "She humiliated me," Isadora insisted, her fangs descending slightly. "You humiliated yourself," Malric corrected. He turned his gaze to the floor, to where Lorien and Wisteria huddled. For a moment, his eyes locked with Lorien's. She expected to see hunger or disdain. Instead, she saw curiosity, a deep, unsettling assessment. "Stand up," he commanded. Lorien scrambled to her feet, pulling Wisteria up with her. She kept her head bowed. "Look at me." Lorien forced her chin up. Malric's face was sharp angles and shadows, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lorien, your majesty. Lorien Driftwood." Lorien. He tested the name, rolling it around his mouth like a vintage. "You stepped in front of a blow meant for another. Why? You knew Isadora would likely kill you." "She is my friend, sire," Lorien whispered. "Fear doesn't change that." Malric stared at her for a long heartbeat. Then he turned back to the court, his voice amplifying without effort. "For 3 centuries, the highborn have ruled through fear. We treat our tributaries as cattle, and we wonder why rebellions spark at the borders. Isadora believes that power is the right to strike those who cannot hit back." He turned to Isadora, who looked suddenly small. "The betrothal is ended." The collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Isadora went pale. You cannot. The council." "I am the council," Malric snapped, his power flaring, shaking the glass in the windows. "Get out of my sight, Isadora, before I forget that your father was my ally." Isadora fled, humiliated, her entourage scrambling to follow. Malric turned back to Lorien. He extended a hand, not to strike, but to offer. "Lorien Driftwood, you have more courage in your little finger than my court has in its entirety. Come with me." Lorien stared at the hand. Taking it meant death, surely. Refusing it meant death, instantly. She reached out, her rough, work-worn hand trembling as it touched his cold, smooth palm. "Where are we going?" she breathed. Malric pulled her closer, his lips curling into a smile that was terrifyingly void of humor. "To find out if you survive the night. The king's wing of the Onyx Citadel was a place no human had walked in living memory, save for those who never walked out. It was a labyrinth of obsidian corridors and tapestries, depicting wars fought before humanity had discovered fire. Lorien walked 2 paces behind Malric, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Niall Westgrave, the captain of the King's Guard, trailed them. Niall was a hulking figure of silent menace, his golden eyes tracking every twitch of Lorien's muscles. Malric pushed open double doors of carved ironwood, revealing a private study that looked more like a scholar's sanctuary than a tyrant's lair. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound tomes. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, but it burned with blue flames that offered little warmth. "Sit," Malric commanded, pointing to a velvet armchair near the fire. Lorien sat on the edge of the cushion, ready to bolt. Malric went to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. "Drink. It's brandy, not blood. I have no interest in drugging you." Lorien took the glass, but didn't drink. "Why am I here, Your Majesty?" If you mean to punish me for the scene in the ballroom, just do it. The waiting is cruel." Malric leaned against his heavy oak desk, crossing his arms. He studied her with that same unsettling intensity. "You think I saved you to punish you? You humans have such limited imaginations." "I think kings don't end betrothals over a spilled drink," Lorien countered, the brandy giving her courage she didn't possess. "Isadora is powerful. Her family controls the southern mines. You insulted them for a waitress?" Malric's eyes flashed. "I insulted them because I am bored, Lorien. I have lived for 600 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have had sycophants and flatterers and trembling cowards surrounding me for centuries. Tonight, you were the only thing in that room that felt real." He pushed off the desk and began to pace. "Isadora was a political necessity, but her cruelty is pedestrian. It lacks imagination. You, however, throwing yourself in front of a blow? That is rare." "It was stupid," Niall grunted from the doorway, speaking for the first time. His voice was like gravel grinding together. "Stupid, yes," Malric agreed. "But interesting." Lorien set the glass down. "Am I a pet, then? A curiosity to entertain you until the novelty wears off?" Malric stopped pacing. He moved with a blur of speed, appearing instantly before her chair. He placed his hands on the armrests, trapping her. His face was inches from hers. She could smell the scent of rain and ozone on him. "You are a variable," he whispered. "The court is a chessboard that has been stagnant for 100 years. I just knocked over the queen. Now, I need to see where the pawns fall." He straightened up. "You will stay in the guest suite adjoining my chambers. You will be treated as a highborn guest. You will attend me at court." "Why?" Lorien asked, bewildered. "Because the court needs to be shocked," Malric said, turning away. "And because I want to see if the vipers eat you or if you bite back." Lorien was led to a bedroom that was larger than the entire servants' dormitory. The bed was draped in silks of silver and charcoal. A wardrobe was already filled with gowns that looked like they had been woven from moonlight and shadows. Once alone, Lorien rushed to the window. It was barred, overlooking a sheer drop into the stormy sea below. There was no escape. She sank onto the bed, her mind racing. Wisteria was safe for now. Malric had ordered the castle healers to attend to her. But Lorien was in the belly of the beast. There was a knock on the door. It opened before she could answer. A woman glided in. She was tall, with skin the color of polished mahogany, and hair shaved close to her scalp, revealing intricate tattoos of silver ink. Her eyes were vertical slits, like a cat's. "I am Zanara," the woman said, her voice a purr that vibrated in Lorien's chest. "The king's advisor, and his sister." Lorien stood quickly, bowing awkwardly. "My lady." Zanara circled her, sniffing the air. "You smell of soap and fear. Malric has made a dangerous play tonight. Isadora will not forgive this. Her father, Duke Vane, is already rallying his banners." "I didn't ask for this," Lorien said defensively. "No one asks to be the fulcrum upon which history turns," Zanara said, trailing a sharp nail down Lorien's arm, not drawing blood but leaving a white line. "But here you are. Malric believes you have a spark. He thinks you can survive the shark tank." Zanara leaned in close, her breath smelling of mint and raw meat. "Prove him right, because if you are weak, I will kill you myself, to spare Malric the disappointment." Zanara left as silently as she had entered. Lorien stood trembling in the middle of the room. She looked at the luxurious bed, then at the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. She walked over and picked up the poker. She didn't sleep in the bed. She slept in the chair facing the door, the iron bar gripped tight in her hands. The game had begun, and she was the only player who didn't know the rules. 3 days passed, 3 days of silence from the king, while Lorien was scrubbed, polished, and dressed by silent handmaidens who treated her like a doll. She wore gowns of deep violet and midnight blue, fabrics that marked her as under the king's protection. On the morning of the 4th day, the summons came. "The king rides," Niall Westgrave announced, standing at her door like a statue of war. "You are to accompany him." Lorien was given a riding habit of black leather and velvet, fitted for movement. She was led to the courtyards where the hunting party assembled. The horses were monstrous beasts with eyes of burning coal and breath that steamed in the morning chill. Malric sat atop a massive black stallion. He looked imperious, a god of war in a heavy fur-lined cloak. When he saw Lorien, his expression remained impassive, but he nodded toward a grey mare. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I grew up on a farm before the tithes took it," Lorien said, swinging herself into the saddle with practiced ease. "I can ride." A flicker of approval crossed his face. "Stay close. The Whispering Woods are not kind to stragglers." The party consisted of Malric, Niall, Zanara, and a dozen guards. Noticeably absent were any of the other nobles. This was a private excursion. They rode hard, leaving the citadel and plunging into the dense, ancient forest that bordered the vampire lands. The trees here were white as bone, their leaves black. A perpetual fog clung to the ground. "We are hunting a shade stalker," Niall briefed her as they slowed to a trot. "A beast of shadow and hunger. It has been preying on the outer villages." "I thought vampires were the only predators here," Lorien muttered. "We are the civilized predators," Malric said from ahead, his hearing sharp enough to catch the whisper. "Shade stalkers are chaotic. They kill for sport, not sustenance." "And you don't?" Lorien challenged. Malric halted his horse and turned back. The woods went silent. "I kill to maintain order, Lorien. There is a difference between a gardener weeding a bed and a fire consuming a field." "Tell that to the weed," she shot back. Zanara laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "She has teeth, brother. Dull, human teeth, but teeth nonetheless." They tracked the beast for hours. The air grew colder, the fog thicker. Lorien felt a prickly sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. "Halt," Malric commanded softly. The horses stamped nervously. Malric dismounted, drawing a long sword that shimmered with runic light. "Niall, flank left. Zanara, take the trees. Lorien." He paused, looking at her. "Stay on the horse. If it comes near you, run." "I'm not leaving you," she said, surprising herself. "This is not a debate," Malric snapped. Suddenly, the shadows beneath a massive oak tree coalesced. A creature erupted from the darkness, a nightmare of shifting smoke and razor-sharp claws, the size of a carriage. It shrieked, a sound that tore at the mind. The horses panicked. Lorien's mare reared, throwing her. She hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of her. Chaos erupted. Niall was shouting orders. Zanara was a blur of motion, firing silver bolts from a crossbow. Malric engaged the beast head-on, his sword flashing. Lorien scrambled backward, her hand searching for a weapon. Her fingers closed around a fallen branch, useless against such a monster. The Shadestalker swatted Malric aside with terrifying force. The king crashed into a tree, his sword skittering away. The beast turned its void-like eyes toward him, preparing for the killing strike. Malric was dazed, struggling to rise. Lorien didn't think. She saw a glimmer of silver near her foot, one of Zanara's dropped bolts. She grabbed it. "Hey!" she screamed, hurling a rock at the beast. "Over here, you ugly smoke cloud!" The beast hesitated, its head snapping toward her. That split second was all the time she bought. Lorien didn't run away. She ran toward it. As the beast lunged for her, she slid across the mossy ground, baseball sliding beneath its shadowy bulk. She jammed the silver bolt upward into what she hoped was its belly. The creature shrieked, an unearthly wail of agony. It thrashed, its form destabilizing. Malric was there in an instant. He recovered his sword and, with a roar of effort, drove the blade through the creature's neck, severing the connection to the shadow realm. The beast dissolved into wisps of black smoke. Silence returned to the forest, heavy and absolute. Lorien lay on her back, panting, covered in mud and black ichor. Malric stood over her. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, looking wild and terrifying. He dropped his sword and knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "I told you to run," he growled, his eyes wide. "I don't follow orders well," she wheezed, sitting up. "Besides, you looked like you needed help." Niall and Zanara emerged from the trees. Zanara looked at the dissipating smoke, then at Lorien, her eyebrows raised high. "She baited a stalker," Zanara said, disbelief colouring her tone. "A human baited a stalker to save a vampire king." Malric didn't look at his sister. He stared at Lorien, his fingers tightening on her shoulders. He wasn't angry. He looked shaken. "You are bleeding," he said softly, touching a scrape on her cheek. "I'm fine." She brushed his hand away, though her heart raced at the touch. "You are not fine," Malric said, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "You are reckless, foolish, and entirely magnificent." He stood up and offered her his hand. This time, when she took it, the grip was firm, an anchor in the storm. "Ride with me," he commanded, pulling her toward his stallion. "Your mare has fled." He lifted her onto the front of his saddle, mounting behind her. His arms caged her in, holding the reins. She could feel the cold hardness of his chest against her back, the slow, powerful beat of his heart, so much slower than a human's. But there. "Why did you do it?" he asked as they turned back toward the citadel. "Because," Lorien whispered, leaning back slightly against him, exhaustion taking over. "I realized something." "What?" "That you aren't the monster in this forest, Malric." He went stiff for a moment, then relaxed, his chin resting momentarily near the top of her head. "Don't be so sure, little bird," he murmured. "The night is long, and I have many faces." But as they rode back, the twist was not in the monster they killed, but in the eyes of the court spies watching from the ridges. They saw not a king and a servant, but a king and a warrior. And deep in the citadel, Isadora received the report. She didn't scream. She smiled, a slow, terrible curving of lips. "She bleeds," Isadora whispered to the shadowed figure in the corner of her room. "If she bleeds, she can die. Prepare the poison. But not for her, for him. Let's see if she saves him when he is tearing out her throat." The apology came in the form of a masquerade. A week after the incident in the Whispering Woods, the Onyx Citadel was transformed. The grim stone walls were draped in tapestries of silver and teal, and the enchanted ice chandeliers were lowered to cast a fractured, dream-like glow over the great hall. It was the Festival of Eclipses, a convenient excuse for Isadora and her father, Duke Vane, to publicly mend bridges with the king without admitting fault. Lorien stood near the back of the dais, no longer in a servant's uniform, but not quite a noble either. She wore a gown of slate-grey silk, simple but elegant, a gift from Zanara. A mask of silver lace covered the upper half of her face. She felt like an imposter, a ghost haunting a feast of predators. "Breathe," a low voice commanded. Malric stood beside her, resplendent in formal military dress, a half-mask of black iron obscuring his scars. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the swirling dancers below, but his body was angled toward hers, a subtle shield. "They are staring," Lorien whispered. "Let them," Malric replied, taking a sip from a heavy golden goblet. "They are trying to decide if you are my weakness or my weapon." "Which am I?" Malric turned to her then, his grey eyes burning through the slits of his mask. "You are the only thing in this room that isn't lying to me." Below them, the crowd parted. Isadora approached, flanked by her father. She wore a gown of gold that looked like molten metal, and her mask was a sunburst of diamonds. She held a crystal decanter on a velvet pillow. Your Majesty, Isadora purred, curtsying low. My father and I offer this vintage from the Founder's vault as a token of renewed understanding. Let us drink to the stability of the realm. The court went silent. To refuse a public peace offering was to declare open war. Malric looked at the decanter, then at Isadora. He sensed no magic, no immediate threat. To the realm, he said flatly. Isadora poured the wine, thick, dark, and smelling of ancient spices. Malric took the glass. He drank. Lorien watched Isadora. The vampiress wasn't smiling. She was watching Malric's throat work with a terrifying intensity. The effect was not immediate. The music resumed. Malric handed the empty glass to a passing page. But 10 minutes later, as he led Lorien onto the floor for a mandatory dance, his hand clamped onto her waist with bruising force. Malric, she whispered, wincing. His skin was burning. Vampires ran cold, but heat radiated from him like a furnace. He stumbled slightly, a misstep that the keen-eyed courtiers instantly noted. "Get me out of here," he ground out, his voice sounding like it was being dragged over broken glass. "Now." "What is it?" "The wine," he gasped, his pupils dilating until his eyes were entirely black. It wasn't poison to kill, it was thirst. The frenzy, an ancient, chemically induced state where a vampire's higher brain functions shut down, leaving only the apex predator. And he was standing in a room full of humans and rivals. Lorien didn't panic. She grabbed his arm, steering him toward the side exit. "Make way!" she ordered the gawking nobles, channeling every ounce of authority she had mimicked from Zenara. "The king requires air." They made it to the corridor just as Malric let out a low, guttural snarl that made the hair on Lorien's arms stand up. He slammed her against the stone wall, his hands pinning her shoulders. He wasn't seeing her anymore. He was seeing a heartbeat. He was seeing a vein. Lorien stared into the void of his eyes, her own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his chest. "Malric," she said, her voice steady despite the terror. "It's me. It's Lorien." He leaned in, inhaling her scent, his fangs fully extended, grazing the sensitive skin of her neck. He was going to tear her apart, but then he froze. A shudder racked his massive frame. "Run!" he choked out, fighting his own muscles. "Lorien, run!" Instead of running away, Lorien grabbed his face with both hands. "No," she said fiercely. "I am not leaving you to them." She kicked open the door to the nearest room, the armory, and shoved him inside, bolting the heavy oak door just as the screams began in the ballroom. But the twist wasn't that Malric had turned. It was that Isadora hadn't poisoned him to kill the court. She had poisoned him so the court could watch the civilized king tear his pet human to shreds. The armory was dark, lit only by the slivers of moonlight filtering through the high arrow slits. The air smelled of cold steel and leather oil. Malric crouched in the corner, shaking violently. He had torn off his coat. His shirt was shredded, revealing muscles that coiled and snapped with uncontrollable energy. "Stay back!" he roared, the sound more beast than man. "The smell! God, the smell of you!" Lorien stood by the door, her back pressed against the wood. She could hear the guards pounding on the other side, but she had thrown the heavy iron deadlock. If they came in, they would kill him for the safety of the crown. That was Isadora's play. Prove he is a monster, then put him down like a rabid dog. "I'm not afraid of you," Lorien lied, her voice trembling. "You should be." Malric slammed his fist into the stone wall, cracking the masonry. "The toxin, it strips the humanity. All I want, all I can think about, is tasting you." He turned his head, those black eyes locking onto her. He moved with predatory grace, stalking toward her. Lorien looked around for a weapon, not to hurt him, but to defend herself. She grabbed a training staff. "Malric, listen to my voice. You are King Malric Heartfall. You do not kill innocents." "There are no innocents," he hissed, circling her. Only pray. He lunged. Lorien ducked, swinging the staff to trip him. He moved too fast, catching the wood and snapping it like a twig. He tackled her, sending them both skidding across the floor. He pinned her down, his weight crushing. His teeth snapped inches from her face. Lorien screamed, not in pain, but in frustration. She jammed her forearm against his throat, holding him back. "Look at me!" she screamed. Something in her tone, or perhaps the contact, made him pause. He was panting, saliva dripping from his fangs. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the blackness in his eyes receded for a microsecond. "Lorien," he whimpered, a sound of pure agony. "Help me." "How?" she cried. "Tell me how." "Blood," he rasped. "I need to ground the hunger. But if I bite you, I won't stop." Lorien's mind raced. He needed blood to flush the toxin, but the act of feeding would trigger the kill instinct. She looked at the shattered remains of the staff. A jagged splinter of wood lay near her hand. "You don't need to bite me," she whispered. With a swift, decisive motion, she grabbed the splinter and slashed her own palm. The scent of fresh blood hit the air like a hammer. Malric roared, his head snapping back, his body arching. "Drink!" Lorien commanded, shoving her bleeding hand against his mouth. "Not from the vein, from the offering. It is given, Malric, not taken. Given." Malric hesitated, his whole body vibrating with the effort of restraint. Then, slowly, terrifyingly, he licked the blood from her palm. He didn't bite. He didn't tear. He drank what she offered, and as the copper taste hit his tongue, the tension began to leave his frame. The toxin, designed to trigger upon the violence of the hunt, was confused by the willing sacrifice. Malric collapsed on top of her, burying his face in her neck, sobbing dry, tearless heaves. "I have you," Lorien whispered, stroking his sweat-dampened hair with her uninjured hand. "I have you." They lay there for hours in the dark, the king of vampires cradled in the arms of a human servant. When the sun began to rise, Malric lifted his head. His eyes were grey again, clear but exhausted. He looked at her bandaged hand. She had torn a strip from her dress to bind it. "You broke the frenzy," he said in wonder. "No one has ever broken a chemical frenzy." "I'm stubborn," she smiled weakly. Malric sat up, pulling her with him. He looked at the door. "They will expect to find a corpse." "Let's disappoint them," Lorien said. But as Malric stood, he stumbled. He gripped her shoulder. "Lorien, the poison. It wasn't just to make me kill you." "What else?" "It masked something," he said, touching his chest. "My connection to the Citadel's wards. They are down. The castle is defenseless." The twist hit them both at the same time. The masquerade wasn't just a trap for the king. It was an invasion. The Citadel was eerily quiet when they finally opened the door. The guards who had been pounding earlier were gone. "Stay close," Malric ordered, moving with a predator's silence. He had regained his composure, but he was weakened. They moved through the corridors. They found the first body near the kitchen, a guard, throat slit. Not by teeth, but by steel. "Humans," Malric noted, inspecting the wound. "Vampires don't use serrated blades like this." "Rebels?" Lorien asked, her blood running cold. "The Iron Dawn? Maybe. Or mercenaries hired by Isadora to look like rebels." They needed to reach the throne room to reactivate the wards. But as they turned the corner into the servants' wing, Lorien stopped. "Wisteria!" she gasped. Her friend's door was ajar. The room was tossed. Lorien rushed in, ignoring Malric's warning hiss. "Wisteria!" The room was empty, but there was a note pinned to the pillow with a crude iron dagger. "The king for the girl. They have her," Lorien said, panic rising. "They took Wisteria because of me." Malric took the note. He smelled it. His eyes narrowed. "This paper. It smells of lavender and sulphur." "So?" Wisteria uses lavender soap, Malric said slowly. But the sulfur, that comes from the black powder storage in the lower city, a place no servant would have access to unless— He didn't finish. He grabbed Lorien's arm. We have to go. Now. We have to save her. Lorien, think. Why would rebels kidnap a waitress to leverage a king? They wouldn't, unless the waitress wasn't the victim. Before Lorien could process this, the shadows in the hallway lengthened. Figures emerged from the gloom, men and women dressed in grey tactical gear, armed with crossbows and iron chains. And standing at the front of them, holding a heavy repeater crossbow aimed directly at Malric's heart, was Wisteria. She didn't look sick. She didn't look scared. She looked cold. Wisteria, Lorien breathed, stepping forward. Stay back, Lorien, Wisteria said, her voice devoid of the warmth Lorien had known for years. You were supposed to die in the armory. You're making this difficult. You're with them. I am them, Wisteria spat. The Iron Dawn isn't some chaotic rabble. It's a scalpel, and we've been waiting for a chance to cut the head off this snake for years. I protected you, Lorien cried. I saved you from Isadora. And that was your mistake, Wisteria said, her finger tightening on the trigger. You saved me, and you doomed yourself to love a monster. I did what I had to do to get close to the throne. Spilling that wine? It was the signal. Malric stepped in front of Lorien. If you want the king, take me. Let her go. Wisteria laughed. Oh, we're taking you, Majesty. But we need her, too. She's the only one who can keep you docile. She signaled her men. Fire. Bolts filled the air. Malric moved to intercept them, catching two, but a third, tipped with a tranquilizer meant for dragons, caught him in the shoulder. He roared, falling to one knee. Lorien screamed, rushing to him, but rough hands grabbed her. A bag was shoved over her head. The world went dark. The last thing she heard was the sound of her best friend's voice, cool and professional. Package secured. Burn the wing. Leave no evidence. Lorien Driftwood had survived the vampires. She wasn't sure she would survive the humans. Consciousness returned to Lorien, not as a gentle awakening, but as a collision with pain. Her head throbbed in time with a distant, rhythmic dripping of water. The air was thick, tasting of damp earth, sulphur, and the metallic tang of old rust. She blinked her eyes open, the grit of a stone floor scraping against her cheek. She tried to move, but cold iron bit sharply into her wrists. She was bound behind her back, seated in a sturdy wooden chair that felt bolted to the floor. The room, if it could be called that, was a hollowed-out chamber of jagged rock, likely an abandoned mining shaft deep beneath the city. The only light came from the harsh, hissing blue flame of a gas lantern sitting on a rough-hewn table. Across from her sat Wisteria. The sight was more disorienting than the blow to the head. Wisteria, who used to braid Lorien's hair by the kitchen hearth. Wisteria, who wept over injured stray cats. This Wisteria wore a heavy canvas coat, reinforced with leather patches, and she was sharpening a serrated combat knife with a slow, terrifying rhythm. Scrape, scrape, scrape. You're awake, Wisteria said, her voice flat, devoid of the bubbly warmth Lorien had known for a decade. She didn't look up from the blade. Good. The king is proving resilient. We expected him to break within the hour. Where is he? Lorien demanded. Her throat felt like it was filled with glass shards. Down the hall, chained in sun steel, Wisteria said casually, testing the edge of the knife against her thumb. A bead of red welled up, but she didn't flinch. It mimics the frequency of direct sunlight. It burns him every second it touches his skin. He hasn't screamed yet, though. I respect that. Monsters usually whine the loudest. Monsters! Lorien pulled at her bonds, the iron cuffs rattling. Wisteria, look at yourself. You kidnapped us. You're torturing him. Why? You were my sister in everything but blood. We starved together. We froze together in the scullery. Wisteria slammed the knife into the table with a violence that made the lantern flicker. She finally looked up, and Lorien recoiled. Wisteria's eyes were rimmed with red, burning with a fanatical, cold fire. "Exactly," Wisteria hissed, leaning across the table. "We starved because they feasted. My parents didn't die of a winter fever, Lorien. You were too young to remember the truth. They were drained, hunted for sport by a drunken duke and his entourage who thought a peasant's life was cheaper than a bottle of vintage." She stood up, pacing the small circle of light. "The Iron Dawn isn't just a rebellion. It's a reckoning. We are the consequences of their cruelty. And Isadora, that vain, stupid woman, gave us the key to the kingdom." Lorien froze, the name cutting through her confusion. "Isadora? She hates humans." "She hates Malric more," Wisteria scoffed. "Who do you think lowered the wards? Who do you think gave us the patrol routes? Isadora paid us to kidnap Malric. She wants the throne. She thinks that once she plays the grieving savior and is crowned queen, she can wipe us out with the Royal Legion." Wisteria stopped pacing and smiled, a grim, humorless twisting of lips. "But she doesn't know about the black powder." A chill that had nothing to do with the damp cave swept through Lorien. "What black powder?" "We've spent months tunneling beneath the citadel," Wisteria whispered, her voice trembling with dark excitement. "While the highborn danced and drank, we packed the foundations with enough explosive to turn that mountain of obsidian into a crater. Isadora won't get a throne. She'll get a tomb." "You're going to kill everyone," Lorien whispered, horror dawning on her. "The servants in the kitchen, the stable boys, the children in the lower wards. People like us, Wisteria. You're not saving them, you're incinerating them." "Collateral damage for a free world," Wisteria said, her face hardening into stone. "Freedom has a cost, Lorien. You of all people should know that. You were willing to die for a vampire. I'm willing to kill for a future." She walked to the heavy iron door, checking the lock. "I'm going to check on the king. If he breaks, he might sign the abdication before we blow him up. It would lend legitimacy to the new republic. If not, well, ashes don't sign treaties." "Wisteria, please!" Lorien cried out, straining against the chains. "Don't do this!" Wisteria paused at the door, her hand on the latch. For a split second, the mask slipped, and Lorien saw the frightened girl beneath the soldier. "I'm sorry, Lorien. Truly. I wanted you to be on the right side of history." The door clanged shut, the lock engaging with a heavy thud. Lorien was alone. The silence of the cave rushed back in, broken only by the hiss of the lantern and her own frantic breathing. Panic threatened to choke her, but she forced it down. There was no time for fear. She looked around frantically. The room was bare stone, no loose rocks, no sharp edges near the floor. Just the table, the chair, and the knife. Wisteria had left the combat knife embedded deep in the wood of the table. Lorien twisted in her seat. It was just out of reach. If she leaned forward, her forehead touched the table edge, but her bound hands were too far back. "Think," she commanded herself. "Think like a rat in a trap." She didn't struggle against the cuffs. She struggled against the chair. Rocking her weight violently, she threw herself sideways. With a jarring crash, the chair tipped over. Her shoulder hit the unforgiving stone floor hard, sending a shockwave of pain down her arm. But the chair didn't break. She groaned, biting her lip to keep from crying out. She was on her side now. The table leg was inches from her face. She began to scoot backward, dragging the heavy wooden chair with her. It was agonizing work. The stone floor scraped her arms raw, and the iron cuffs dug into her wrists until she felt warm blood trickling down her fingers, inch by inch, grunt by grunt. She maneuvered herself until her back was to the table. She arched her spine, straining her arms upward, her fingers scrabbling blindly against the table's edge. There. Cold steel. She touched the hilt of the knife, but touching it wasn't enough. It was stuck fast in the wood. She couldn't pull it out with her awkward grip. "Change the angle," she whispered through gritted teeth. Instead of trying to pull the knife out, she lined her bindings up with the serrated edge of the blade. It was a dangerous gamble. She couldn't see what she was doing. She began to saw her wrists back and forth against the stationary blade. Zip, zip, zip. The sound of rope fraying mixed with the sound of skin tearing. She hissed in pain as the blade nicked her wrists, cutting shallow but stinging lines into her flesh. She ignored the blood. She focused on the rope. Snap. One strand gave way. Then another. "Come on," she sobbed, sweat stinging her eyes. "Come on." With one final desperate yank, the weakened rope snapped. Her hands flew apart, hitting the floor. Lorien lay there for a second, gasping, her chest heaving. She was bleeding, bruised, and exhausted. But she was free. She scrambled to her knees, shaking the blood back into her numb fingers. She grabbed the knife handle and wrenched it free from the table with a primal grunt. She stood up, swaying slightly. She looked at her reflection in the darkened glass of the lantern. Her hair was matted, her dress torn, her face smeared with dirt and blood. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She gripped the knife, testing its weight. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a queen. She was a survivor who had fought for every scrap she'd ever eaten. And she knew something Wisteria had forgotten in her zealotry. You don't fight fair when you're fighting for love. She moved to the door and pressed her ear against the cold iron. Silence. Lorien Driftwood turned the handle. Lorien moved through the tunnels like a ghost. She found the guards, 2 men playing cards, and didn't try to fight them. She threw a rock down the adjacent tunnel. When they went to investigate, she slipped past them, locking the gate behind them and jamming the mechanism with the knife. She followed the smell of burning flesh. She found Malric in a cavernous chamber. He was suspended from the ceiling by glowing, white-hot chains. His shirt was gone, his chest a map of burns and scars. His head hung low, his breathing shallow. "Malric," she breathed, rushing to him. He lifted his head. His face was gaunt, his eyes dim. "Lorien, leave. The trap." "I'm not leaving." She looked at the chains. They were held by a winch on the wall. She ran to it and cranked the lever. The chains lowered, and the moment his feet touched the ground, the tension released. Malric collapsed into her arms. He was heavy, burning up with fever from the holy metal. "I can't fight," he rasped. "My strength is gone." "Then I'll be the strength," she said, draping his arm over her shoulder. "We have to get out. Isadora is going to blow the citadel." "No," Malric said, his voice gaining a hard edge. "We have to go back." "Are you insane? You can barely walk." "If Isadora takes the throne, she will unleash the legions. The war Wisteria wants? Isadora will give it to her, and humanity will be extinct in a year." He gripped Lorien's arm. "I have to stop her." They hobbled toward the exit, but the path was blocked. Wisteria stood there, a detonator in her hand and tears in her eyes. "I can't let you leave, Lorien," she said, her hand trembling. "It ends tonight." "It doesn't have to end with death," Lorien shouted. "Isadora played you, Wisteria. She wants you to blow up the castle so she can blame the humans and justify a massacre. You're not the hero, you're the excuse." Wisteria hesitated. She wouldn't. "She slapped you for spilling wine," Malric rasped, straightening up, summoning every ounce of kingly authority he had left. "Do you think she cares if you burn? She is likely watching from a safe distance right now, waiting for you to light the match." The truth of it settled on Wisteria's face. She looked at the detonator, then at Lorien. "The charges are set," Wisteria whispered. "But the timer, it's manual." She threw the detonator to the ground and stomped on it, shattering the mechanism. "Go!" Wisteria said, turning her back, before the rest of the Dawn realizes I've betrayed them too. Come with us, Lorien pleaded. I have a revolution to salvage, Wisteria said, loading her crossbow, and a duke to kill. Go! Lorien dragged Malric into the night air. Horses were tethered outside. They stole to and rode for the citadel, the moon hanging low and red in the sky like a bloodshot eye. The great hall was packed. The nobility had gathered for an emergency succession. Isadora sat on the obsidian throne, wearing a crown that was too big for her. Duke Vane stood beside her, looking smug. King Malric has abandoned his people, Isadora announced, her voice magically amplified. He has run off with his human pet, proving his mind is unfit to rule. By the laws of the First Night, I claim the crown. The High Priest stepped forward with the scepter of rule. Does any blood challenge this claim? I do. The doors of the great hall didn't just open, they exploded inward. Malric stood there, leaning heavily on Lorien. He looked like death warmed over, burned, bleeding, his clothes in tatters. But the aura of power rolling off him was suffocating. Malric, Isadora gasped, standing up. You should be dead. Disappointed, Malric limped forward, Lorien matching his step. The crowd parted in terrified silence. You kidnapped your king, Lorien shouted, her voice ringing clear. You hired rebels to kill him. You betrayed your own kind for power. Lies of a human whore, Duke Vane roared, drawing his sword. He charged at them. Malric didn't move. He couldn't. Lorien did. She pulled a pistol she had taken from the rebel hideout, a crude, black powder flintlock. She didn't aim for the heart. She wasn't a killer. She aimed for the leg. Bang! The shot deafened the room. Duke Vane screamed, his knee shattering. He fell skidding to the floor at Malric's feet. That, Lorien said, smoke curling from the barrel, was for the Waitress. Isadora screamed in fury. She raised her hands, summoning a storm of dark magic. Kill them! Kill them all! But the royal guard didn't move. They looked at their broken duke, then at the battered king who stood tall despite his wounds, and finally at the human woman who had defended him. Niall Westgrave, who had been standing in the shadows, stepped forward. He drew his sword and pointed it, not at Malric, but at Isadora. The guard serves the blood, Niall rumbled, and you, my lady, have no honor. Isadora looked around. She was alone. Her coup had crumbled the moment her victim refused to die. Malric finally reached the steps of the throne. He looked up at Isadora. Step down, he whispered, or I will show you why the history books call me the Impaler. Isadora trembled. She looked at the crown, then at Malric's eyes. She took the crown off and let it drop. It clattered loudly on the stone steps. She fled into the night, her power broken, her name disgraced. Malric didn't sit on the throne. He collapsed on the steps. Lorien sat beside him, holding his hand as the entire court knelt in a silence that was finally, truly respectful. 3 months later, the court was shocked one last time. King Malric Heartfall did not execute the rebels. He did not purge the noble houses. Instead, he stood on the balcony of the citadel, Lorien by his side. She wore no crown, only a simple band of silver, but she stood as his equal. Malric announced the Edict of Dawn. The tributary system was abolished. Humans were granted citizenship and representation in the new council. It was a chaotic, difficult transition, but it was peace. Wisteria was never seen again, though rumors of a vigilante hunting corrupt nobles in the south persisted. That evening, alone on the balcony overlooking the sea, Malric turned to Lorien. They say I am weak for letting them live, he mused, that a king should rule with fear. Lorien rested her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. Let them talk, she smiled. Fear builds walls, Malric. But love? Love builds kingdoms that actually last. He kissed her then, a soft, lingering promise under the moonlight. The Vampire King and the Waitress who slapped back, a story that would be sung for 1,000 years. And in the end, it wasn't the blood that mattered. It was the beat. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more romances and twisted fairy tales.